Everyone. Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews. We're in Evangelical Encounters the Restoration. We're doing another Tuesday Tangents with Chris Jensen, author of Obscure Mormon Doctrine, Uncommon Beliefs of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Before we get started, just a reminder, merch store, mormonbookreviews.com. Got me a shirt, got me a hat. We got coasters, cases for your phone cases, iPhones and all that, and Android. And I want to thank those of you who have been purchasing stuff on mormonbookreviews.com. I also want to thank those who have been supporting the channel financially on both Patreon as well as through PayPal. And if you're interested in supporting the channel, there's going to be a link in the description. So here we have Chris Jensen, author of the book Obscure Mormon Doctrine. And we're doing this Tuesday Tangents segment where we basically just do a 20-minute segment on something I have no idea what we're going to talk about. And he's just going to talk about a chapter in his book or a doctrine that he discusses in his book. And I don't know what he's going to talk about. So Chris Jensen, author of Obscure Mormon Doctrine, coming to us from Ireland. What do you have for us today?
I'm in Ireland right now. It's hard to know where I am. Last time we talked, I was in Salt Lake. But I live in Spain and I'm in Ireland. I won't bore everybody with the reasons why. Thank you for having me, Stephen. The book is organized by, alphabetically, 40 chapters. And so today we're going to talk about one of the chapters that begins with C, children.
Okay, great.
And it's a topic that I think is very interesting because the LDS Church, like with most doctrine, has its own very unique, interesting take on children, and many of us have children, and so it's a relevant topic. The LDS view is that children are innocent, which means that they don't need to be baptized when they're born. They're pure, and only when they reach 8 are they accountable, and so that's when LDS children are baptized. Typically, that's when I was baptized. So if you are, if you have a child, or if you die before the age of 8, you automatically go to the highest level of heaven, which in LDS theology is the celestial kingdom. And you never have to be baptized, and you never have to receive your endowment, which is something I'll quickly mention, but it's related to the temple. Mm-hmm. Okay, the implications of that are interesting because roughly half of all people ever born on this earth have died in infancy. And even more than that, if you include stillborn births and the mentally deficient who receive the same treatment as young children when it comes to their fate after death. And that means that it appears, nobody can say for sure, but based on that, it appears almost certain that more than half of the people that will ever live on this earth will go to the celestial kingdom because they will die before the age of 8.
And I think that's actually one of the strengths of Mormonism, is that, Protestant Christianity, Catholicism basically taught that, one of the Catholic doctrines is no longer recognized, was limbo, So what is the fate of these children who didn't have the chance to receive baptism, didn't have the chance to receive these saving ordinances, as would be within the context of the Restoration? And that was a great thing because even John Calvin believed that basically I think he said something that the floors of hell are paved with the babes of the that didn't make it, So it's a really brutal doctrine, and it kind of makes okay, what was the whole point of the atonement if it kind of was a failure, at this point? So what I think is so fascinating is that Joseph has this revelation, this idea that the people who aren't mature enough, who haven't reached the age of accountability, they're actually going to be in the highest level of heaven.
Yeah, which I think is a great doctrine. You could actually argue whether it's fair, in the sense that It's great. It's actually great news. If you really believe it all, it's actually great news for those people. It's very sad if they die young on earth, but if you look at the eternal perspective, they never have to go through the trials and the tribulations and the tests of earthly existence in order to achieve the celestial kingdom. They automatically achieve it,
Now,
which
this
is
is
actually
fascinating because now
great news.
we got another doctrine here, and this is the idea of pre-existence. So now, in one sense, there's an implication here. Basically, you have these people who, fought in the war of heaven, had their station is kind of determined here on earth based on what they were, how loyal they were, how worthy they were during the war in heaven, a part of the pre-existence. So maybe we could talk about what is the implication of these children who basically like maybe die at birth or don't make it to the age of 1. What does that imply about their status in the pre-existence?
That's a question I've never thought of. I mean, in the book, we talk about the pre-existence, obviously, and we talk about foreordination.
Mhm.
Although, most of us are not foreordained. We don't have our destiny set before we come to earth. And so I would hesitate to say, to comment either way, that these children were either, you could argue that they were actually better in the pre-existence, and this is their reward to come to earth but not have to suffer the tribulations of earthly existence in order to achieve the celestial kingdom. I really don't know. I don't know if it's just bad luck that they die young, but then good luck that they automatically go to the celestial kingdom, or if it had something to do with their performance in the pre-existence. I think it's a great question. I don't know the answer.
Yeah, and it's just just because when you start peeling these doctrines, like you're just trying to look into it and you're thinking of the implications, and these are kind of like thought experiments. Like, okay, what does this mean? Within Islam, it talks about children dying, and they say that it's almost in the sense of eternity. The great tragedy that happens. It's such a minor thing because in the context of eternity, it's nothing.
Yeah,
And
it's a
maybe it's
moment.
kind of a similar idea.
No, it's a very similar idea. And and it's got to be very comforting if you're a devout LDS member who has a child die young, to know, and to believe that that child has qualified automatically. I mean, more or less automatically. It is automatic, except, so we have to differentiate between children who die before the age of accountability and those who die after, which is
Yes.
8.
Right.
And if you die before the age of 8, you don't need to be baptized, and you don't need to have your endowment performed for you, which is what happens in the temple. Otherwise, you were baptized if you're LDS, and if you're not LDS, then you have to be baptized vicariously, which is what happens in the temple. But even if you die before the age of 8, you do need, if you want to reach the highest level of the celestial kingdom, which is exaltation, becoming a god, the goal of existence, you still need to be celestially married, to be sealed. And the question then becomes, okay, how can you be, sealed? How can you be married in the temple if you die before the age of 8? And so there's a solution to that problem, which is that after the resurrection, so after the second coming of Christ, and after you are resurrected, and your body, your glorified body, has grown to maturity. Don't worry, I'll mention that in a minute, but your body, your spirit, I'll get to that in a minute. But once your glorified body has been reunited with your spirit and grows to maturity, you will then have a chance to socialize, in other words, date, choose a partner, marry them.
Okay.
And that's something that you will have to do in order to achieve exaltation, even if you die before the age of 8. And then, of course, somebody will have performed, as we talked about in our last segment, through temple work, a sealing between you and your partner on behalf of you, so that it's a temple marriage.
Hmm.
And then you can, only then will you be able to achieve the highest level of the celestial kingdom. Okay, sealing is another interesting aspect of children in the LDS Church. So I'm divorced. I was married in the temple. I was married in the Salt Lake Temple, and I'm divorced. And so for me, it's an interesting topic to contemplate, because if parents get a divorce, a civil divorce, and they cancel their temple marriage, this does not affect the children. The
Okay.
children remain sealed to their original parents forever.
Okay.
And they can never be sealed to anybody else.
Okay. I want to, it's fascinating. I'm just thinking there's real world implications to these doctrines as well, because of course, when we look at the Mountain Meadows massacre, they made a point to separate the children that were under the age of 8 from the group. And of course, then anybody who was over the age of 8 was massacred. And but they felt that they were doing a mercy by saving these children. And of course, then they adopted them out into Mormon families. And so these children ended up becoming Mormons. And of course, probably now, as a result, are on their way to godhood because their ordinances were done. But of course, the people that didn't receive that, they were over the age of 8, did not have that afforded to them. So that's why when I talk about doctrine and what are real world applications, like this, it's theoretical, but it also does have effect on this world as well.
No, absolutely. And that's, that was part of the joy, a big part of the joy of writing the book for me, was to take it out of this abstract level and really boil it down to what are the real world implications. And so with children, this is a real world implication. And, if you get sealed to somebody, and then you have children, those children are sealed to both of those parents forever. And they can never be sealed to somebody else, which has huge implications, obviously.
Sure. Yeah.
So, in other words, that rule is not altered by adoption, by consent of the natural parents, by a request of the child after reaching 18, or the death of the natural parents. Nothing can alter that fact.
And it makes you wonder, okay, so you have a scenario in which this happens, where the children are sealed to these parents who are no longer, as a matter of fact, because they were LDS and now they left, they would be cast into outer darkness. So what does that mean what are the implications of you, the parent, being cast into outer darkness and having your children sealed to them for eternity?
Okay, another great question from you that actually, it appears to the viewers as if I have planted you in the audience, probably. Like the magician that calls for a volunteer. Because there is an implication to that I'm going to get to, but before I'll just quickly answer. Those children will be adopted by worthy parents and raised by worthy parents.
Oh.
Which is something a lot of people don't know. They don't realize, they don't dig down. And so that's why the book is interesting to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Well, since we're on the subject, I was going to wait, but who raises the children?
Yes.
The natural parents raise the children if they are worthy.
Okay.
Otherwise, the children are given to a worthy LDS couple.
Okay.
And there's a quote in the book: those who die as children and whose parents are not worthy of exaltation will be adopted into righteous families and raised by worthy parents. So children have to be raised by somebody in the afterlife until they reach maturity, until their body reaches maturity. And that has to be a worthy parent, who raises this glorified body. And so that's the solution to that problem.
Okay.
So coming back to the body. So when a child dies, its spirit goes to the spirit world, which is discussed in the book, and probably most people watching this know. What they don't necessarily know is that we were adults in spirit before we came to earth in the pre-existence. And there's a chapter on the pre-existence. And so after we die and we go to the spirit world, the child's spirit assumes its adult size.
Okay.
And form in the spirit world. Then at the time of the resurrection, this adult-sized spirit will be reunited with the child's glorified body.
Okay.
But the body will still be the same small size that it was upon its physical death.
Okay.
And that's when this raising by parents comes into play. The child will be raised at that point by its own parents, if they are worthy, until its glorified body, grows to full maturity to match the size of its spirit.
Okay.
Otherwise, by worthy LDS parents.
Fascinating.
And this is something very few. I mean, I didn't know it. I mean, I had a rough idea. Now I know it much better. And then once the body has grown to maturity to match its spirit, we talked about this when we talked about temples. The child will then have the chance to date, find a partner, marry, and then enjoy exaltation. In other words, achieve the highest level of the celestial kingdom. Celestial marriage is required for that. And that's it. That's all I have to say about children.
Well, that's an interesting topic, and I'm glad that we're discussing these various doctrines that are, and just a reminder, folks, it's Obscure Mormon Doctrine, and he has, everything's documented. This is a great resource for those of you who are interested in not just what maybe you would read on the church's website, their official doctrinal statements, but if you want to dig deeper and find out what did Brigham Young teach, what did Joseph Smith teach, what did many of the other prophets of the church, what were the kind of doctrines that they were teaching. And of course, these are God's spokespeople here on earth. And so they're there to, provide information there to people that hasn't been talked about, and to be a prophet, seer, and revelator. That's the whole point of this. And so if you want to know more about what doctrines were taught by apostles, by general authorities, very important people who basically were set apart to do that role, to teach the world doctrine, this would be a great resource for you to go to. Chris, thank you so much for coming on the program today.
Thanks for having me. I look forward to our next session.
So there you have it, another segment of Tuesday Tangents, and we're going to continue this journey where we're going to discuss various doctrines of Mormonism, some more obscure than others. And we're going to talk about the implications of these doctrines in the real world setting, and just kind of do a thought experiment. And I think this is really fascinating stuff, and then of course I do have an evangelical audience that's growing, and I'm hearing back from you. And I know that you guys are really appreciative of this channel being unbiased, like your book is, like it's everybody has a bias, but I really feel like you made a real effort to just state the doctrines and try to keep your personal stuff out of there, which I think is key. And I try to do the same with this channel as well. I think that's why we clicked so well so early on. Folks, Chris, thanks again. And don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the notification button for when a new episode comes out. We're on all the major platforms, including Apple and Spotify. If you want to support the channel, there are links in the description. And you all have yourself a great day. Stay tuned.